I do think it's important to acknowledge another more understandable motivation behind the opposition to this deal, or at least skepticism to this deal. And that is a sincere affinity for our friend and ally Israel. An affinity that, as someone who has been a stalwart friend to Israel throughout my career, I deeply share. When the Israeli government is opposed to something, people in the United States take notice. And they should. In such a dangerous neighborhood, Israel has to be vigilant. And it rightly insists that it cannot depend on any other country, even its great friend, the United States, for its own security.
Well, President Obama seems to think he knows what is best for Israel. In fact, POTUS warned of dangers to Israel if we didn't make a deal with Iran. I wonder if the Iranians are still chanting death to America, death to Israel, and celebrating in the streets. I'm going to go ahead and say probably yes. But with the American-Israeli perspective, my friend, Israeli relations expert Philippe Assouline. Philippe, great to have you tonight.
Great to be with you again, Tomi.
Philippe, does President Obama really know what's best for Israel here?
Well, the perception is definitely that he doesn't in Israel. He keeps saying he's been a stalwart friend to Israel, and that's true in terms of defense budgets. But Israelis feel that when it's mattered most, he hasn't been with Israel. So, for example, during the Gaza war, when Israel was being rained down upon by rockets from a territory it vacated, Obama's support for Israel was very hesitant, and the weapons transfers were actually stalled at the moment where Israel felt the most isolated. I think you probably remember the airport was even shut down, but the Americans said that flights couldn't go to Israel anymore. They were the first ones to do it. So Israelis don't feel that he's actually a stalwart friend, and so definitely not that he has the best advice to give.
In that speech as well, he called out pro-Israel lobby groups here in the United States, suggesting that maybe there's too much support for those, too much money, too much pressure. What's your take on that one?
That's a super interesting question, because the American Jewish public is very much focused on keeping a low profile in certain ways, politically. It doesn't want to stand out. It's very averse to strong national identity because of a history of persecution. It's afraid of the Republican Party in many ways. It's actually less supportive of Israel on the average than the Christian American population. And he's been using dog whistles to suggest to them, you're not being loyal to America here. If you're against the deal, you're being loyal to Israel. These things that American Jews are extremely sensitive to, and he's been going for that for actually a number of months. He was criticizing Israel previously and basically telling them, it's not me, it's you, right? Israel is not what it was anymore. He's been trying systematically to divide Israel and American Jews politically.
I think so as well. I think we see it time and time again. And for him to suggest that he's somehow been behind Israel, I don't know what picture he's drawing there, but I know the events of when Netanyahu comes to town, we see how the Obama administration reacts, we see how his entire staff reacts, we see how the Democrats react. If that's not an indication, I don't know what is. But I also think it's important to mention what you brought up very clearly there, is that American Christians seem to be behind Israel full force. Why do you think that is? It's such an interesting idea there.
There's a lot of interesting theories. Some of them can be a bit incendiary. I think the history of persecution of Jews, the history of a lot of American Jews that come from socialist countries, the fear of persecution, there's a tendency to go vote on the left. The focus was more assimilation and integration as Americans than it was supporting Israel. Whereas Christian Americans or just American mainstream might not have that baggage. They might not just worry about such things. And if they see something that they feel is right and they feel that their friend is in danger, they're just going to stand up and do something about it. And it's actually quite inspiring for those of us who support Israel to watch how Americans with no direct connection to Israel are willing to stand up for it when they feel something's not right.
I think that's important as well. Very, very interesting. And I want to go into last night's debate in just a moment. But before we do that, I want to stick back to President Obama and his speech there. He indicated that Israel might be the only country that actually opposes the Iran deal, kind of singling them out there. Do you think that that's true?
No, I mean, we know it's not true. The Arab countries, the other ones who are the best equipped with Israel to know what threat Iran poses, are also against this deal. Israel's been the only one that says it vocally, that comes to Americans and says, listen, we're friends, we need you to listen to us now. We know this neighborhood, we know this country, pay attention. But the idea that only Israel is opposing this deal and that Israel wants a war is false. And it's done, again, to intimidate Jewish domestic support for Israel or against this deal. I have to add, though, the question of making it about Netanyahu personally, which Obama is also doing, that resonates a little bit with Israelis. There's a bit of the security establishment in Israel that's telling Netanyahu himself to keep a lower profile so that it doesn't destroy the relationship between the countries.
Very interesting relationship between the two of them. They're always very tense. Same thing with Obama and many of the leaders of the world. We know that the same kind of thing happens with Putin. Of course, he's pretty friendly with those in Iran, but that's a story for another day. I want to turn, though, to what everyone's talking about, and that's what happened last night, because Israel was brought up quite a bit. And one person that brought it up that was kind of on the opposite side of most of the other candidates on that stage was Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. I want to play a clip there for those that may not have seen it. Let's take a look.
Sending it to countries that burn our flag. Israel's not one of those, but even Benjamin Netanyahu said that ultimately they will be stronger when they're independent.
All right, Philippe, I want your reaction to that. He made a couple of points there saying that we shouldn't arm the moderate opposition. That was one, because they take our Humvees. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the last part is what I really want to get your take on there, that Israel would be better off if it was more independent from the United States. What do you think?
I think you might be surprised in my answer, but I think Rand Paul might be right. I don't think his statement is necessarily something that's based on hostility to Israel. American aid to Israel generally has been fantastic, and it allowed Israel to survive, but it also comes with heavy strings attached. Sometimes they're big ropes. And that means that Israel is not allowed to finish wars the way it wants. It's not allowed to fight terrorism the way it wants. It's not able to pursue the diplomatic path it wants. It's forced to make concessions. I'm not sure Israel needs the aid so much now. America has a big debt problem. If it gives Israel a bit more freedom in determining its own future without threatening the friendship between the countries, I don't see why the aid wouldn't stop.
And what he said as well is that if we have a surplus, that's when we aid people like Israel. However, when we have a debt crisis right now, we shouldn't borrow money from China to give to Israel. That's a point that he made. And we know that the candidates on the stage, anytime that you appear to be anti-Israel, a lot of the Republicans are going to attack you for it. So I agree with you, though. I think that we need to dig a little bit deeper into what Rand Paul was saying and really analyze it, because I don't think it was anti-Israeli either. How do you think that American Jews are going to react to those statements from Rand Paul?
I think American Jews, the ones who are on the Democratic side, are going to be opposed to what he says, no matter what he says. On the Republican side, there might be a defensiveness because there's so much hostility coming at Israel now from different quarters, from the BDS movement on campuses, from terrorist groups, from the UN. Now there's perceived hostility from the Obama administration that people might react emotionally before thinking through what he's actually saying. I don't think Rand Paul is suggesting at all that America take a distance from Israel in terms of its friendship. There might be an issue with his father there, though. His father was associated with, or that libertarian movement in general has been associated, fairly or unfairly, with anti-Semitic issues. So there might be some knee-jerk reaction there. Personally, I support what he said. I think America has to deal with its own problems first, and that's a debt crisis, and it can remain friends and supportive of Israel without giving money.
It's important to have that perspective as well, that American money does come with strings attached, and they might not be strings that Israel wants to comply with. It might actually be harming them. So a good point to bring up and a good perspective. Now, my last question for you is, going into 2016, we want support from all different groups. Now, the Republicans tend not to pander for it. They tend to just bring the issues forward. That's what I love about the party. However, I want to know, you mentioned that American Jews tend to vote Democrat. Are we going to see that in 2016? Are they going to show out in support for Hillary Clinton or, God forbid, Bernie Sanders, in your opinion?
I think in their majority, that's inevitable. I think you'll have less of support for the Democrats than you had during Obama's first election, for example, where the rate was in the 80s. I think you'll have a significant drop. This Iran deal issue, how it pans out in September is going to matter a lot. But the majority, I suspect, will still vote Democratic. And you have a lot of Democrats that are coming out against the deal recently, like Chuck Schumer, have a lot of influence on the Democratic Party. So I think it's going to be a generational thing before the majority of the Jewish vote in America goes to the Republicans.
Very interesting there, because we know that most conservatives are very pro-Israel. So I love to examine that enigma, that divide. Philippe, thank you so much for being here and explaining that perspective like only you can.
Thank you for having me.
Have a great night.